All right, guys, so something messed up with the recording, so I get to do it a second time, but that's cool. We're all good. So, principle of exercise testing. There's a nice little quote here at the bottom where, as methods, there may be a million and then some, but principles are few. The man who grasps principles can successfully select his own methods. The man who tries methods ignoring principles is sure to have trouble. By Harrington Emerson. And that's the big thing that you need to focus on, which is we understand the basic principles of training. We can apply them to any training program. And we're going to be able to look and really understand whether or not a program that we're given or we find that someone is using is appropriate for themselves. So let's get after it. We got some terms we're going to get into. First and foremost is strength. When we're referring to strength, we typically refer to it as dynamic, meaning we are going to be moving. One repetition maximum is going to be the heaviest load that you're going to be able to lift through a full range of motion. We can also look at static strength, so that would be like that hand grip dynamometer, the greatest amount of force you can produce against an object that's not moving. When it's coming to sport, we're really going to be looking at dynamic, and really what we're interested in is power. And that's how quickly you can develop and produce that force and make it move an object, including yourself, a distance in a certain period of time. The more powerful you are, the tend to be the better athlete you are, meaning you run faster, jump higher, can throw the ball harder. Now, there's a number of field tests, but they're not the most specific with ways we can test it. We have pictured here is what's known as an isokinetic device. We would actually be looking at the speed at which you can strengthen your leg or straighten your leg, or your leg is being to be straightened at a specific velocity, so we can look at the force you're producing. So yes, we can look at it joint by joint, but obviously sports happen to be multiple joint, and that's where we're going to use certain things like timing devices, tether, velocity transducers, and otherwise that we can measure your power production. We then have muscular endurance, and this is effectively how many repetitions you can do at a given percentage. We've already done a lab on this, and it turns out if you can do more reps at a given percentage, usually means you're stronger. So the way that we can increase this, get stronger or have improvements in the metabolic components and the cardiovascular functioning. So like anything else, if you want to do better at the 225 bench press test, have a higher bench press, then make sure you're in good enough shape that you can do as many as you can. Even though the relationships between how many reps you can do in the 225 and how successful you are in the NFL is not actually that great. Now, what we have here is just a statistical example of 3 different athletes that have different max strength, different power outputs, and different endurances. So think about your best athlete for like a shot putter, weightlifter, have the greatest power output. Now, this also typically means they're going to be stronger, but that doesn't mean they're going to be cardiovascularly as good. Whereas if you have an athlete that's going to have to do more and more repetitions of the same thing, you want to have somebody that has some muscular endurance. So things like swimming, you're going to be able to, or you need to do more than just one stroke, which brings us to aerobic power. And this is going to be the rate at which we can deliver energy to our cells aerobically on average. And this is why we care about things like a VO2 max. If you've got a greater VO2 max, not only can you keep up a higher work rate relative to someone who's lower, but you can also recover faster in between bouts, which is going to make you a better athlete. And you can also recover at a higher intensity. With anaerobic power, which is going to be the rate at which you can develop that power utilizing all of your energy systems. And it's usually going to be much shorter, like the Wingate's 30 seconds. Critical power tests are going to be about 3 minutes. They're absolutely miserable, but it's a pretty good idea of total output. And I love this picture because that dude is, that is an base of intensity for cheering that dude on. Because if we have a greater anaerobic power, well, that's going to give us advantages into certain things like short distance track and field, give us some advantages in short sprints when it comes to things like swimming, and then also sports that have quick, high power outputs followed by longer recoveries. So this could be things like collegiate basketball with the given timeout structures, and then also looking at things like the wonders of performance that you're going to see in football, since you're going to have really high outputs and then longer recoveries. But hence the aerobic also plays in. Now, here are our 5 principles of training. You need to understand these, because if you understand these, you can look critically at any training program and or the one that you're writing and decide whether or not it's going to be useful. First, individuality. Thanks to genetics and the natural variability you have from one human to another, we're not all going to adapt at the same rate. We're all going to start at different spots, and we're all going to have different levels of success on different programs. So we can't expect everyone to make the same progress at the same rate. Now that's what's referred to as a high responder and a low responder. Genetics are a big component of this. And then so is your environment, your nutrition, and everything going into it. So if you get a program that was written for some crazy high-level athlete, that's not necessarily for you, because how your body's going to respond, the rate at which you're going to make those improvements, the amount of work you're used to, all those are going to be very different, which lends itself to then specificity. We need to be training specifically for the things we want to get better at. And it's not just the muscles we're using, but it's the fibers inside of those muscles. So if you're trying to become a high-level sprinter, you've got to learn how to tap into all of those fibers in your lower body and make sure that you're developing them, not just your slow twitch, because it's not going to really help you with that top-end speed. It will help you with the endurance, but not the top-end speed. So we have to keep in mind, it's not just the muscle fibers, it's not just the muscles, but the individual fibers. And obviously it's going to be the movement patterns. And that's where things like being able to squat has a really high amount of specificity, because it turns out that's how you get up and off a toilet and down to a chair or up off that chair. Squatting is something that we're going to be doing all the time. And being able to do so through a large range of motion with a higher load, it's going to help carry over, because it's going to make everything else you do in your life feel that much easier. And that's why you see basic pushing movements, basic pulling movements, hinging movements, and carries, because all of those obviously have a high degree of specificity to life in a lot of different activities you're going to find in sport. Now, reversibility is the simple, if you don't use it, you lose it. And this could be where you have like a really high level long distance runner that decides they're going to be a power lifter. Well, their cardiovascular performance is probably going to go backwards while their strength is improving. And we all are limited by the same 24 hours in the day. So if we're trying to train all these things up at the same time, we're not going to be making progress on everything all at once. We're probably going to go backwards on a few things if we're really focusing on the one. Or obviously, if we have to detrain, we have to unload because of injury and otherwise, we can really expect ourselves to go backwards. Now, progressive overload simply means that we are going to be making the training program harder in one way, shape, or another. We can be adding reps, we can be adding sets, we can be adding load, we can be shortening our rest period, we can be training more frequently. There's a number of different ways that you can make a training program more difficult. But the key is that over time, the program has to get harder, you have to get better. If that's not happening, then we're not programmed correctly. And we have to make sure we're not progressing too quickly for the actual rate of improvement we're expecting to see from our athlete. We need to make sure that we're asking them to get better, but at a rate that actually is feasible for them to maintain for long periods of time. We then have variation, which is effectively we're trying to, over time, increase our intensity and typically decrease our volume until we peak out. And that's more standard linear periodization. What we're really looking for is that our program is going to change. We're not going to be doing the exact same sets and reps and percentages and our wonderful rest periods the entire program. Things are going to change with time. The program is going to get periods where it's more difficult and then have a week that's a bit easier deload, and then it's going to get more difficult again. That is a natural way the program should be structured. If your program never changes, it never challenges you, it's going to effectively cause essentially a certain amount of staleness and monotony, which then can just lead to burnout because you're bored with it and you're not going to make any more progress. It's the equivalent of if today I ask you to do 20 handstand push-ups, you might have to do 20 sets of one, but if that's literally your workout every day for the next 2 years, at some point, you'll probably just where you just do 20 handstand push-ups in a row and then just be bored with it because it's not challenging you any further. So just be mindful, like anything else, we have to progress the program to the individual and make sure that we do have some form of progression as we're going through, or variation to our program that's going to make them get better. So we're going to look at our athletes and figure out, okay, what are the muscles they're using? What are the types of training that we can utilize? Is this a sport that's on land, in the sea, on a bike, etc.? What energy systems are we really focusing on? And then what are some of the major sources of typical injuries in the sport? How are people normally getting hurt playing? And if we know these things, we're going to be able to design a program that's appropriate to not just helping our athlete perform, but keeping them healthy, which can keep them out there. An injured athlete is an athlete that's not useful to their team. So you need to make sure that we're programming in such a way that's going to be able to enhance their health. And like anything else, our training program is going to be designed based on this needs analysis. Now, we are going to be getting most of our progress from doing both a concentric, so lifting, and then a lowering, so an eccentric. So isometric is going to be the hold in between. All three of those muscular functions have a purpose. You can look at triphasic training by Cal Dietz as a really interesting and kind of another way of approaching that. But we need to make sure that we're doing both a concentric and an eccentric. We're controlling the weight during certain parts of the movement. We also are developing that ability to explode through the movement. So we're going to be able to activate those higher threshold motor units to get that full and fastest contraction. We want to start with our power movements and strength movements, those large compound movements and big muscles, into our isolations, smaller muscles, prehab, rehab movements at the end. Just like anything else, as you become more and more tired from training, it's harder and harder to focus. So you want to make sure the exercises you're choosing are going to be effectively easier to perform, especially when you get further on and you're just simply tired. Now, rest period is something that you can play with a little bit, and I apologize for sprinting through this so quickly, but this is what you guys missed today if you were not in class, and this will be obviously up on the YouTubes for you. Leave a comment if you have questions. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.